Welcome to Stay Fearless, the FSP podcast with all things baseball performance. I am your co-host and co-founder of Fearless Sports Performance, Joey Hanley.
And I'm your co-host and co-founder, Dr. Alex Acevedo, and welcome to another episode of the pod.
All right, what is up? Today we got a very special guest, longtime mentor of ours, Garrison Roy, also a co-founder of Sports Performance. So Garrison, let's kind of build off of that. Talk about some of the experiences that have led you into Inked and what you're up to right now.
Dude, yeah, it's a long story. I'll make it relatively short. I've always knew that I was going to kind of do my own thing, and obviously learning a lot of things along the way. You guys met me early on in my coaching career where, was making that transition from playing to coaching, from interning at the Florida Baseball Ranch at the time, Florida Baseball Armory now, to interning at Cressey's, to then going full-time with the Florida Baseball Ranch. Had a really cool experience there, going to Taiwan a few times, twice actually in 2 different years with Jimmy Wong. So that was pretty sick experience, and seeing the culture there and how, even though the baseball game is the same, culture is very different, and seeing how people interact and how very organized and methodical those guys were was very eye-opening and interesting to see. And that kind of sparked me to be like, okay, hey, there's bigger things to this than just playing a game, right? Like, this is bringing multiple people together, helping young men mold themselves into better quality humans, to create a better society, and not have a bunch of tyrants or people who don't know how to take care of themselves health wise, right? So going from there to then, I was like, all right, hey, I was kind of and people don't talk about this that much in coaching, but it was a burnt out stage of coaching for me, just coaching so much for so long in the off season. I was like, all right, I got to make a switch to kind of not be so bogged down with all this, and not kind of be a hamster spinning a wheel where I'm just doing the same thing for other people and not progressing myself as a coach. So from there, obviously kind of went from that, coached in the college sector for a while, for a season at Limestone College, did that for a season, and I enjoyed it, but being in a very competitive playing environment, and then also being on a same level Division II team, but also not a winning team, was kind of rough for me. So I was like, all right, I got to win at something. Either it's business or win games, or, and there were stipulations at the time, this was pre-COVID, where you couldn't do remote training and coach college baseball at the same time. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to limit myself to just the, 26 or more plus guys that's on one college roster. And fun fact, I actually kind of realized at those Division IIs, D3s, the reason why they recruit so many guys is because coaches actually get a surplus of the people that they bring on. So whether or not you're going to play for them, or you're going to play on a JV team, which is really popular here in the Carolinas, just kind of calling it out as it is, you get put on that to basically just pay the coach's salary. So if you are sticking on the JV team and you're not actually going to play for that varsity squad, that's kind of why you're in school.
I didn't realize that. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah. So kind of realizing some of that stuff, I'm just like, all right, well, I got to have something where I can actually make a difference with. And then connected with Tread early on. It's really big now, obviously, but we were in a little closet space with 3 guys. It was Dennis Ivlicek was who he was with Driveline for a while, Cohen, Ben, and myself. And then Rob Blanc came on after, who I partnered with Ink Sports Performance. So again, trying to make this long but short. Right? So we're condensing this all together. And we were starting something really cool, learning how to actually train guys remotely, because it was a new concept, right? Like, it was something that's never really been thought of, or people thought it was a little weird. It was like, why don't you just train me in person? Why don't you have an in-person facility? It's like, well, it kind of limits your time. And kind of the rut that I ran into at the Florida Baseball Ranch was like, okay, hey, I'm working 12-hour days. I'm in person doing the same hamster wheel movement, but I feel like I can make more impact on guys' lives than just having to be there in person and running them through the same type of warm up, running them through this, right? So, and that's reflected a lot on how my coaching has evolved too, to not have so much monotonous stuff going on and add some variability in there. Then eventually, later on down the road, as Tread grew, we decided to part ways, decided to do my own thing. Me and Rob started Inked back in early 2023, and here we are.
Here we are. It's an awesome story. There we go.
Yeah, man. So that's where we're kind of more on the remote side because we have quality of life that we'd like to have as well.
Right.
And not down in a facility. Not saying we don't train guys in person, but sometimes it does kind of make you a slave when you're having to be in person all the time, 24/7, or at least in the afternoon, because you have reverse schedules of everyone else and you can't be doing life things with family. And if you're deciding to grow a family and things like that, you kind of have to
a harder.
think bigger picture for sure.
Yeah. And so, talking about kind of the remote training thing, obviously it's different than kind of the standard that was for forever. What do you see as, obviously you talked a little bit about the pros, but what do you see as the pros and cons, and in your experience, what do you find kind of maximizes kind of the effectiveness of being trained remotely and training people remotely?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think going from in person to then remote, I think it did help a lot of my building blocks because I had to learn how to coach first. And then instead of just throwing a program at a kid, I had to be really specific on what I was trying to get out of and be very detailed, whether it was in the videos that I was creating, being like, hey, like you want to make sure you do this, this, or this, or, don't make these compensations. Right. And sometimes even later on, as much as detail I would give, guys would still kind of mess it up. And then I have to kind of undo their preconceived idea of what they needed to do. But I think it's definitely evolved from that to now, and even probably 4 years ago, where guys were starting to basically copycat that exact same program that they got from one coach, not have that coaching experience, and then try to spit that to everyone and say, oh, hey, here's this one size fits all program that fits everything without having any certifications or anything like that. Unfortunately, that's where some of these guys have been getting in, not even, I say trouble, but like they've been putting themselves on the brink of injuries because they're just training without much
context and guidance.
There's less context, or even not having the idea of a full picture, like what's a macro schedule look like versus transitioning from player to coach. You may not have that macro point of view. You're just looking at the day-to-day, or hey, I'm chasing a PR, or oh, hey, this worked for me, so it's got to work for everyone now.
There's context with everything. I think every single guy is going to be different. Every guy's going to need something differently. And I think too, like, even if you're working on the same drill or the same exercise or whatever, like it could be for a different purpose, and there'd be different, like, I don't know, like points that you want to hit, or like, let's say like you're doing a certain exercise, but you want to modify it a certain way to hit one guy's like needs versus another guy, modify it a different way to hit their needs. And if you don't understand the context of like the need of the exact athlete, like you could totally kind of not just get guys hurt, but not see the reap the benefits of what you're trying to get at.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, you could be spinning your wheels, kind of like how I was finding myself early on in coaching. Was like, hey, we're doing a lot of the same things over and over, expecting a different result, having a little definition of insanity there, right? So it's like, okay, hey, why are we doing this? But you got to find out the principles behind the why, and not just the modalities or the means of how you're going to do exercises, right? You can get a same adaptation with any lift. And I use this for an example of Olympic lifts. I think we were talking about this via text before we started this. It was like, hey, like, is that optimal for everyone? Probably not. But hey, if I want to train on one side of that speed velocity curve, I'm going to have to do something kind of similar to that to move really fast weight to, be on that power or that power speed cycle, if you will, of being able to learn how to move things quickly versus just being stuck in that strength block or pure, brute strength and not learning how to transition that to power and then obviously wanting that to transition to your sport is really the end goal, right?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. There's context with everything, man. And you kind of hit the nail on the head, I think, when you said like understanding the why. I was talking with one of the Guardians guys. His name's Joey Cantillo. Really,
Oh,
really
nice.
good dude. And I was talking to him. He's one of the players. Must have been like a month ago or a month or so ago. And he was asking me some questions, and he asked me like in my playing career because we were just kind of talking, talking shop, talking baseball. And he was asking when I kind of saw like my jumps in my career and what he saw the difference was. And what I see with like athletes and stuff like that. And I was kind of reflecting on it for a few days, and then we kind of revisited the conversation. And I guess like kind of what I reflected to, what I ended up getting to was when I stopped asking what and started asking why. We had a really good conversation about that. But I think when you are asking yourself, what is it that's going to make me a better player? You start falling into, which is exactly what I fell into, especially in high school, is like, oh, what are the 3 drills that are going to get me 10 miles an hour? What is the 3 exercises that are going to get me, 10 miles an hour, whatever it is? Like,
The TikTok
what is
cloud.
it? Yeah, it's
Quick fixes. Yep.
yeah, one of those quick fixes. Whereas when you start asking yourself why, and you start asking yourself, okay, like where am I? Or where is this athlete? And then identifying their needs and what their shortcomings are, whether that be strength, whether it be power, whether it be the way they move, whether it just be their routine or their sleep or whatever it is. And then you can identify those and attack those specific things that might be contributing to them. Whereas if you're just looking at like what gets velo, then you're just going to be completely lost because at the end of the day, it's totally different for everybody. It's so context specific.
Yeah. And you got to fit the program to the athlete, not fit the athlete to the program. And I think that's where a lot of people get, especially even remote training, wrong, is they're like, hey, let's find out where you are. Okay, hey, we're going to mold this to where you can actually fit this in.
Yeah.
Versus like, hey, oh, your lowest hanging fruit is nutrition. Cool. Everything else is on the back burner until you get this locked in first.
Yeah.
If that's what it takes, if that's your number one thing, or like, oh, hey, like you're having a shoulder problem, this entire program is going to be you getting rid of your shoulder issues, right? And becoming a better mover. Again, you don't want to isolate it to just the shoulder. Like you're not going to do shoulder exercises all day.
Yeah. But you're
right?
tailoring it to the need,
Exactly. So that's that really, if your end goal is either gaining velocity, getting out of pain or whatever, that should shift everything on where you're at. And you got to find out, I'm pretty sure I'm stealing this from Randy because he said a lot of stuff that I kind of regurgitate over and over. But he's like, you got to find out where you are on the map, right? You go to the mall and you don't know where you are and you're looking for a particular store or your end goal in this case, right? And you're like, well, I don't know how to get there. Well, what's the first thing you got to do? You got to find out where you are on the map to be able to get to your end goal.
100%. Yeah. If you're looking at the map and you're saying, I need to get to this store, but you don't know where you're at, how are you going to get to the store?
You'll have a lot of roundabouts and you'll end up probably getting outside of the store, going all the way around it. And like, oh, here's the sign.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just already having that, and it cuts out so much time, right? And this is kind of how I'll transition to this next piece, where time is of the essence for a lot of these baseball players now, especially post-COVID. Or even you could zoom back even further to 1980s, where guys are like, oh, hey, cool, like I'm playing high school ball, I'm playing college, I'll play the pros, and they'll just continue to play until the cows come home, right? Different situations and different economical dynamics with that too. So just even outside of the game, seeing how other things were being influenced by that. But now, on the major league side, right, like they cut out some of the rookie ball teams or they cut out all these other teams. So now Major League Baseball has a very strict 165, I think it's the rosters, and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like from, your complex league all the way up to the pros, you can only have 165 dudes.
They made a lot of cuts, and unfortunately, I had to kind of witness a lot of releases this spring. And it sucks, man. And it adds a lot more sense of urgency because, guys don't have time to, let things kind of come together. Like they got to get there and they got to perform or they're out because they don't got spots anymore,
Oh, for sure. And I think if you're approaching, and if you're an athlete listening to this, like if you're approaching your training as a shotgun approach to be like, let's just see what works. You're like we mentioned earlier, you're wasting time, but you're also wasting effort and resources of whatever it might be that you're needing. So you need a lot more laser focused approach to what you actually have. But yeah, like really, it sucks. Like, and especially if you're identifying yourself within the game, you take that a little too personally. It's like, no, man, like we just have this rule set in stone. You might get called 2 weeks from now, be released from waivers and be on a completely different team or on the same team if someone gets hurt, right? Like that's how crazy it is now. And then same thing with college, right? Like during that whole transition of COVID, you had your guys's were your careers were in this rut where you're like, okay, hey, do I do a 5th year or a 6th year? And you had the options to do that. So that was putting a lot of those high school guys on the back burner because they could have transitioned into a position
roster spots.
Like, hey, yeah, you get a little bit of extension of time. You get a little bit more opportunities for you, but for those other guys that cut out some of those opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And that was a trickle down to guys reclassing in high school. So they would go back a year. And so from that top level, and it affects everything further down the chain.
100%.
100%.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say we had when my season got cut from COVID, they essentially told us like, you're welcome to come back. You can take this COVID red shirt. And then they pulled a handful of players aside and just said, look, you guys are the only ones that we're going to allow to come back if you want to come back, because it's not fair to these incoming freshmen that got their season cut short, just like all of you did. So I'm wondering how many schools ended up doing anything like that as well, like us. I mean, when it comes to, you talked about the surplus earlier. I can't imagine that would be in their, benefit. And I didn't necessarily come from the best program, so that probably could have been a horrible approach too. Sure. But at the same time, it probably did force a lot of seniors into the JUCO level. And then there are the schools too who they over recruit and then they send the kids over to the JUCOs as well. So I think that the reclassing in high school is crazy because I had never heard of that before. And they're starting to do it in middle school too.
Yeah, they're doing it in middle school just super early on. And thank goodness that NCAA was like, hey, we're going to cut out this recruiting thing where they can't talk to you until your summer going into your junior year now.
Yeah.
Because like up until that rule, like there was kids literally 13 years old getting like verbal commitments to the big Power Fives like LSU. I'm like, what are we doing? This kid hasn't even freaking developed yet. How do you even know he's going to be a Power 5 guy?
Yeah.
Right. Some of those guys, that whole travel ball circuit's getting nuts right now. It's absolutely wild.
Totally. I think, baseball's in an interesting place, right? Because there's so many things that we're advancing positively in. And with all the tech and, what we're learning about performance, like, it's getting crazy. Like, it's really cool how much we know now about how we can make people better baseball players. But on the flip side of that, we have so many guys that are becoming great baseball players that, there's the competition level is becoming so high that, it's making it really, really hard to make it in this game. And then that's where you get some of this craziness is like, guys are desperate, guys are trying to make it. And it's tough. And I think that's something that I, experienced firsthand on myself is like going through high school. I feel like that was kind of when it was blowing up, like all this, like everything we were learning and, things were starting to change. And I personally felt like I wasn't learning it like there were a lot of things that I learned too late. And I think in this game, especially now that, the competition level is so high, like you can't afford to learn things too late anymore. You know what I mean? Like you gotta be, ready to rock or else, that's it because it's really, really hard to move up in the levels.
Well, you're seeing less two-sport athletes now too. I mean, I know that you wanted to kind of touch on that, but I think that the specialization is starting really, really young now, as it could be a result of that. But
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that a result? Yeah. Is that a trickle down of everything else being uberly competitive that kids feel the pressure that they need to specialize in order to keep up with that? Or
I think that because I'm coaching at the high school level off to the side, I think that they drop the second sport 99% of the time, just 90%. Let's call it 90% of the time, because they believe that they won't make the roster spot, that they're going to fall behind in development, and you could argue that they probably could lose a roster spot over that, depending on the school. Because the coaches now probably have that standard of, if we don't see this kid year round, he must not care about baseball that much. Baseball must not be his number one priority. So that's probably another aspect of it. And when you get coaches preaching that, I think that makes it tougher. I'm not sure if that's a symptom or if that's just something we've had. I mean, I unfortunately specialized at a young age because I wasn't athletic and I didn't want to leave my comfort zone and go play other sports. I can't speak for everybody else with that, but I think in the modern day, the biggest reason is because people want to make that roster spot. And now they're in high school as freshmen and they're rushing to do that the same way that college guys have to rush and minor league guys have to rush, and everything's trickled down.
Yeah, they're trying to prepare for something that's maybe a little further outside, like a high school guy trying to make a college team, so he feels like he needs to specialize and put more work into that, or maybe a middle school kid trying to make the high school team a few years later down the road, right? It might be a little bit of FOMO, but I think a lot of them probably lack, in Joey's case, right? They had that lack of general athleticism. So if they're in a good training program, it actually does them a favor because they're missing a gap there and probably playing too much. So it's kind of catching up to where they needed to be physically wise versus just playing wise, right? Like they had really good baseball IQ or they know how to play the game, but maybe they were just short of that. So maybe cutting out some of those additional sports help them bring them up to another level of physicality, if you want to say it for that. But a lot of schools now too are recruiting out of these academies where kids are just doing online classes in high school, and
like IMGs now, like
schools the IMGs are out here is like Combine, which is $30K a year for guys to just do online school and then go practice baseball, which is nuts.
That's insane.
It's wild, man. And I think a lot of it, is stemming from that. Like the competition is so high, so guys are having to kind of like everybody almost. I mean, I guess from the experience that I've kind of noticed with a lot of guys is like from a young age, they're so worried about whether they're going to get drafted or not, out of high school or college. And they're like eighth graders, freshmen in high school, and they're like, oh, like my shoulder's bothering me a little bit, but like I can't miss my next start because then I'm not going to get drafted in 4 years or in 8 years. And there's a little bit of like a hysteria there, where guys are so worried about so far ahead in the future And I try to keep that perspective and like get guys, to have that perspective of like, all right, like focus on where we're at now. Focus on, don't go crazy thinking about like where we're going to be in 8 years and 4 years. Like let's focus on where we're at. Let's, make sure that we're staying healthy. Let's make sure that we're getting all the things right. So that when it comes time to then get seen by colleges in 2 or 3 years, you're prepared for it. You're not just, like now is not the time yet. I'm sorry, but your travel ball tournament this weekend, you're not going to have a bunch of big league scouts there, writing your name down. I think
Your
a lot of
perfect
guys,
game stat or whatever you're ranking in perfect game at the age of 12 is not going to be indicative of where you end up in college or pro.
exactly. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of guys have kind of unrealistic expectations of kind of what's going to happen so early on in their careers. And I think that's leading to a lot of issues in the game, especially injury. Right now we're seeing a lot of it in the pro level, but just because it's so public, but it's all around the game. And I think even in the pro level, a lot of why guys are getting injured is because they've already had a TJ or they've already had some sort of arm injuries all throughout their career because they were probably in travel ball, throwing an unbelievable amount of innings multiple times a week. And by the time they get to pro ball, their arms are already just totally shredded up.
Posted
Um,
for sure.
yeah,
I think some of that also stems from there is a fine line between babying someone and then being competitive. Like
For
there are
sure.
probably some private sector coaches or facilities that preach too much on the side of caution compared
Yeah,
to,
pro
the
orgs
coach.
too. Pro orgs too
Yeah.
are very cautious or like, oh, let's not promote this guy too soon. Let's not do
Yeah.
this. Say what you want about the Pirates. I think they actually did a great job of Paul Skeens and like not jumping the gun a little too soon, even though he was already at a really high level. They're like, hey,
Yeah.
make sure he builds up some innings here, not just throw him into the, biggest show on earth. People will debate on that, but I mean, some orgs don't even have a plan for like
Yeah.
project
yeah.
it out like how Skeens did,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
I think
that's
it's
the big thing is like having a plan and a goal and like following it and not just, going crazy, because you're so worried about the future, whether you fall on one end of the spectrum or the other, where you're throwing an unbelievable amount of innings, training like crazy, not taking time off, or the other end where you're like, oh, I have to protect my arm. I'm not going to throw, more than 30 pitches in a game until I'm a senior in high school. Like, I think as long as you have a goal and you understand the context of where you're at and what is safe and what is not, I think guys, at the end of the day, it comes back to like understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah,
Well, zooming out and like we kind of outlined the trickle down from big league level rules down to like, travel ball little league, but now even affecting, rippling out and up, right? We all watched the movie Moneyball, right? Like
yeah,
that was the big craze of like the early 2000s, like learning and trying to start measuring things, measuring all this data, but like, hey, what do you do with it? Right, was kind of a big thing. And now like us as coaches are learning how to basically be translators, learning how to interpret all of this data. But because of those smaller output of times and because there's so much pressure now, like all of these owners are not running it as a hobby anymore like they used to in like the 80s, 90s. It was just like, oh, hey, like, yeah, I own this team. It's more for the clout, but they didn't look at bottom dollar. So now these Ivy League owners are rolling in and they're measuring everything, right? So it's almost putting undue pressure on these pro guys to make sure that they're hitting all these data points. And, the old school scouts would just be like, hey, who cares if he's not hitting 300? Like, watch him play. Like, he has an aura about him. He can figure this out,
yeah,
within a year, within a season or something, even though he's not putting up the numbers now. Or, on the flip side of that, it's like, oh, hey, this pitch is really nasty. He needs to throw this more. Okay, well, can his arm hold up with that? Right. I did that in a previous podcast where it's like, if you want to say like, hey, why are there so many arm issues? I think we're doing a great job with this entire podcast of kind of seeing how just a couple changes of a few years ago is now starting to domino effect to every level of play. And it's not just pitch count. It's not just, the training. It's not just nutrition's going downhill, where it's everything that's
there's so much
together, right? And I honestly think that some of these pro team are not the pro teams, but the pro guys are going to be, you'll see less of the 20-year plus veterans because baseball is becoming so younger and so focused on the stats that, like, the guys, for example, Adam Wainwright, who recently retired, like I watched him play in one of his last games. He was throwing 86.
Yeah.
He still get dudes out. But like, if you're putting metrics up there and trying to see other dudes that are coming up that are younger that are throwing 100, and he was throwing gas when he first got into the league, don't get me wrong, but like, some of these owners are just going to clip these guys and be like, hey, like,
you're not good enough anymore.
Yeah, well, not even that they're not good enough. I don't even know if they want to pay the pension plans or everything else. Because, like, if you zoom out for that, it's like, okay, hey, you get
to younger players are cheaper.
You get exactly. Yep. You sign them for a cheaper. You don't have to go through arbitration. You don't have to do all this stuff. You don't get the gold card at year 8. At year 10, you're not getting honestly, I think the best freaking, retiring situation you can have in any profession, right? Like, they max out everything in pension. They have the best healthcare insurance ever, right? Like, and I hope that changes. If everything keeps going down, in the direction that it's going, baseball is going to start to shift a little bit more towards those younger guys. Because also, another thing I didn't mention, kids are also getting paid earlier too.
And
I don't think that's wrong.
Changing it now too, man. Everything's changing, and because we can measure so many of these things that we know lead to better performance, and there's all these correlations between, high velo, high spin rate, the whole, like, the third time you see, an order, batting averages jump up. Like, now the game is changing where everything is being incentivized towards, and Tyler Glasnow has talked a lot about it, is throw as hard as you can and blow out, and essentially, the longevity is kind of being thrown in the back burner. That's why, the bullpen is being used a lot more. You have so many guys that they're 100 and, whatever, command maybe not as good, but the stuff is unbelievable. And they can't throw more than, 15 pitches, 20 pitches in an outing, and they're just going out there and blowing out, getting outs, because that's what the data is kind of pointing towards, and what the performance is pushing towards. And the game is changing, man. The game is changing, and there's a lot of stuff involved. It's more than just a few things. And everything's changing. The way batters are approaching the game is changing. The way pitchers are throwing. There's more home runs. The ball's flying a lot more. Guys are getting better at baseball, so pitchers are having a blow. And Verlander talked about it not too long ago.
Great too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a great clip. Love that.
He was talking about how, early on in his career, he was able to go, 93, 94 an entire game, paint the outside corner, pitch to contact. And now it's totally different. Like, he can't do that anymore because those outside corner pitchers are getting hit over the fence. And he used to have 100 and whatever in the tank. And he never had to use it. And now he's having to use his 97, 98 that he's got all game, because otherwise he's not going to be as successful as he used to be. The game's totally changing, and that's why we're seeing injuries. You can't do that and sustain it for so long without something going. I mean, some guys might be able to, but those are outliers.
Yeah, no, it's an adaptation that they're learning how to do. And I think right before, like, this whole, analytics era, if you want to call it that, started to come in, Cliff Lee, that I met, we went to the same high school together. He was on that track, like, early in his career. He's like, hey, I'm going to throw the crap out of it. And even in high school, like, he had shoulder problems, but would throw 95 in high school and got picked up by the Indians. Oh, don't know what that was. And in high school. And then he's got sent up and down to the bigs and tried to figure things out. And sure enough, he was like, hey, I just had to pull back my fastball a little bit. Like, yeah, I can throw 95, but for me to be able to deal and compete, I was throwing 91, 92, spotting up, right? Yeah. And he was probably, in my opinion, if you're a Cliff Lee fan, you knew that he was absolutely dealing when he was with the Rangers and with the Phillies, but like that guy could dot anything, put it anywhere that you wanted, and didn't have to blow it by guys and still got the job done.
Yeah.
Right. The kind of the lost art of Greg Maddox's pitching era.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go on like too much of this being a rant of like, hey, this was wrong with baseball. Like us as trainers on our side, and Alex, you being a physical therapist, like there's solutions to this and what we can do and help guys evolve from that. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. And I think, to put it into context, we're kind of talking about a lot of this as like it's something wrong with the game. I think ultimately at the end of the day, like those performance, like the numbers we know about performance and like how this correlates in velo and spin rate, like, yeah, it affects performance in a positive way. Like it'll make you a better pitcher if you're, throwing better stuff and your stuff is harder and all that stuff. So I think we have to keep in mind, and where a lot of people that are, publicly speaking about this can't forget is like, you can't tell a guy to be worse at baseball. Like this is their livelihood. This is their job. You can't tell them, hey, why don't you just pitch a little worse and you won't get hurt. But then at the end of the day, you might not have a career.
Right.
So the solution isn't to tell guys, hey, don't do all of these things and be so good at baseball. The solution is, okay, now let's adapt. How do we respond to all of this and create, a human body that is resilient and can handle the demands of the sport as much as possible. So I think from there, it's that's where we start building a foundation of like, a mover that can handle a lot of stress and building volume. And, I think at the younger levels, it's less understood. I think in pro, depends on the organization, but of course, there are some really awesome professional organizations. I was able to see it firsthand with the Guardians of like how well they plan everything out and how early they're already starting to build volume on their pitchers, making sure that they're ready for go time. Those we had a lot. Guardians was really cool because they had the majority of their guys were at spring training early, which was pretty awesome. And they were building up like their volume for spring training way before, not way before, weeks before spring training started, which I thought was really cool to see. To see, how ahead of the curve they really want to be so that they can do it in a way that's preparing them for the demands of the full season, the amount of stress they're going to see, not just the volume, but also the load and the stress, the velo, all that stuff. And really being proactive about it. But with younger guys, and we've seen it with a lot of the high school guys, is they're not even starting to throw until a few weeks before their first outing. And then they're expecting to go 7-8 innings in their first outing of the season. And then they get mad when they're getting hurt. And it's like, hey man, like, you got to take care of your body more. You got to prepare yourself for the demands of the season. You can't just go out there and expect to throw 100 and whatever pitches on your first, second, third outing of the season when you had just started throwing a few weeks ago. Like there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into it. And I think a lot of people don't even realize what the guys, doing it at the highest level are doing to take care of their bodies.
Alex, in your experience when you were with the Guardians, do you know how much time the average pitcher was taking off when the season ended? And I'm not just talking about taking off like from throwing, like just like the whole thing. How long did the average guy generally take some time off before they started playing catch again, at least?
That's a good question. I think it varies so much on the guy that it's really hard to. I don't think I can give you an answer there. But I do know the majority of them didn't spend a full off season being off. Like the vast majority of them took a few weeks, and then we're right back to it tossing. Maybe not going super high intensity in the off season, but I know the Guardians are big proponents of the idea that, and there's research to back it. And I'll kind of allude to the research is like when they looked at UCLs after an off season of being off of throwing, the UCLs were thinner versus the guys who continued to throw in the off season. The UCLs stayed thickened, which meant that they were more resilient. They could handle more stress. And so the Guardians kind of really subscribe to that, where they do push guys continuing to throw in the offseason and kind of throwing year round. That doesn't mean that they're, doing a bunch of, high intensity, crazy stuff in the offseason. But they are maintaining, some volume and some effort to make sure that those structures are still being stressed and being maintained, maintaining their resilience. So, I don't think I can give you an answer of what everybody was doing specifically, but I know
Yeah.
the vast majority of those guys were throwing in the off season, and they all had their routines. I mean, I don't think I encountered a guy that wasn't training in the off season or doing something throwing. A lot of those guys, I know Shane talked a lot about how he was spending a lot of time in drive line in Arizona. Figured out a lot of really cool stuff. He was doing a little bit more training, trying to up his game a little bit. But for pretty much for the most part, I think every single guy was at a facility somewhere. If not,
Yeah.
the Guardians have their winter off-season program that gets started once the dead period is over, and they opened up, and we had a bunch of guys in house from day one of the winter off-season program. So that was pretty cool to see. Like most of those guys, they're getting after it all off-season. They may not be super high intensity, but they're definitely making sure that they're maintaining their some level of stress to maintain that resilience. And I think a lot of guys miss that, where they think that they can just pick up a baseball and go after it. When you're young, you might be able to do that and feel good, but as you get older, your body can't handle that so much. Eventually it takes a toll. It's a lot of stress. Your body's going to break down if you keep on just picking up a baseball and getting after it. But yeah, I mean, Garrison, what are your thoughts on that? And what's your kind of experience that you've seen with a lot of guys?
I think the context is big on that too, right? Like if a guy's having a lot of arm problems, and I used to be like super anti, like don't stop throwing. But if there's a noticeable red flag and like some dashboard indicators where there's external rotation strength or like significant range of motion loss, where it's like, hey, if you continue to throw, you're going to just break because of how limited you are and how much stress you put your arm in. A great example would be like a TOS guy, right? Like he has zinging going down his arm, right? And again, very context specific and very, this one situation isn't going to be for everyone, right? But if that guy continues to throw after having a really long season and having some symptoms later on, right? Having numbness in his pinky, and you're just like, okay, clearly that's like ulnar nerve. He's going to do more harm than good continuing to throw. So that's why Alex is probably also alluding to like, hey, I can't say that everyone did this, because if this guy ended the season where he was kind of run down, his velo was dropping down, he probably needs to take a little bit of a break, hit some of those strength numbers, or maybe just tissue quality, check off certain boxes to then start throwing again. I think that's definitely more ideal than just almost saying like, hey, everyone needs to throw in the offseason. But I do agree with you that also the blanket term of what's been overdone as well is everybody needs to shut down.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's so context specific. Totally depends on the guy and where they're at. And I do think that there's value in taking time off. Like there is the other flip side where guys don't see a value in taking time off from throwing. I think there is value in taking time off, especially if guys aren't recovering well. When you see guys that are they're not recovering in between throwing sessions, they're more sore, they're more tired, performance numbers kind of dip. There's value in the take a couple weeks off. But I think where a lot of people, especially a lot of physical therapists, I'll speak for my own industry, where people kind of get in trouble where they say, okay, like 2 weeks off, make sure that you ice and put some stim, and then we'll get you right back to throwing and just jump you in. And something needs
to change anything, right? Yeah, it's like,
something needs to change at some point, and there has to be.
It's the equivalent of like, oh, hey, we have a car. It's breaking down every time I get up to 60 miles an hour. If I hang out down here below 60 miles an hour, it's cool. Well, let's just not drive it for a couple weeks and then take it back out there, see if we can slowly progress and increment it back up without fixing the engine.
Yeah.
Right. You got to fix what's wrong with it.
60 miles an hour is going to be an issue. You got to fix the problem 100%.
Yeah. And so I think you hit the nail on the head earlier on when you were kind of talking a little bit more about making guys better movers, better problem solvers, right? Like they got to learn that stuff along with learning how to become a better thrower, better athlete, better pitcher, better hitter, whatever situation they're going to put themselves in. Because if they're not moving well, they're not going to perform well. They'll compensate for a short period of time, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And
100%.
so if you're getting back to that point, it's like, oh, hey, yeah, let's rest. Okay. After that rest period, what are we going to change? What's going to be different? Not saying that you have to completely revamp and reinvent the wheel. It's not really what I'm saying. It's like, hey, let's make a small adjustment for certain things. Or like the guy who's coming back from TOS, for example. Okay, hey, like, do you need surgery? Okay, no, I don't need surgery. All right, well, let's make sure you're staying on top of soft tissue work and keeping all the area here. Make sure your training's not, causing some of these TOS symptoms for everything in this AC joint to be compressed. Right? Like maybe there's breathing exercises that you can do.
Yeah.
A lot of other things that you can kind of unpack there that you're still getting better even if you're not throwing.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And then I think too, part of it, it's and you kind of alluded to it just now, is like some guys will, when you talk about like changing something, they want to jump to changing the way they move, the way they throw, some drastic changes. Sometimes it's as simple as like, all right, we ramped up too fast. And your body wasn't ready for that stress. And like, okay, we just have to get back to a ramp up and do it slower. Or we have to, get better about your pre-throwing routine. Or we have to get better about how you're sleeping.
or context
Things like
specific
that. Yeah,
ramping up
yeah.
too, right? Like let's say a guy's coming back, return to throw. He's thrown in the previous season more off-speed pitches than he ever's thrown in his life. It's more than just general volume of throwing at that point. It's, hey, can you get to this percentage of off-speed again?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like, can you do this again? Or, hey, can you learn how to do that? And I'm kind of on this ecological dynamics kick, and I think you guys will, maybe listen to some other episodes with that. But it's like, hey, why do we, and a great practical example of this, bullpen warming up, let's say it's a midweek pin, right? And I'm guilty of this too as a coach and as a player. So don't think that I have all the answers to this. But we have a guy, he's going through his routine. He's going through the windup. One, it's just to a catcher. So there's, again, no other context there. It was one. But he's going fastball, doing his warm up. He's like, all right, cool, I'm ready. 5 fastballs in a row. 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I'm going to go breaking ball. 3 breaking balls in a row. 1, 2, 3. Right. And then we're going, okay, here's some changeups. 1, 2, 3. At what point in the game do you throw 5 straight fastballs, 5 straight curves,
Yeah,
5
it doesn't happen. That does not translate totally.
So you got to train that, right? Like you got to get to a
100%.
point, or even just something as simple as, hey, let's put a stand-in batter or a dummy batter, or add some other, let's have a count. Right? Like that, I think, is really what's missing from guys going from point A of the ramp up to all of a sudden going into a game.
Yeah,
And
100%.
I think, I alluded to this in my notes, but the Jager Sullivan return to throwing protocol was a good step in that direction. But I think with them still transitioning, like they're talking about getting on the mound more, which I think is awesome. But there's still that small piece that I think it's like, hey, like, what can you take to the next level within that ramp up or within that practice or preseason phase to make them be able to withstand some of these stresses that they're used to?
100%. Because I think the stresses, it's big jumps, man. Even if it doesn't seem like that big of jumps, they are big jumps. So I think like we have to start slow. One of the things I thought was really awesome that the Guardians did is like weeks before they had their first pens coming back, because for most, I mean, I saw it mostly with our TJ guys. But weeks before they got onto the mound for their first pen, after the throwing session, I mean, weeks before they would start just tossing off of the mound. And then weeks before that, they would literally just go to stand on the mound and just hang out, do some dry reps, just feel the slope and just be there, look at a catcher, like look down the slope. Because it's more than just the physical stresses, but there's psychological stresses there too, right? If the first time you're jumping on a mound is when you're going to throw your first pen, like your heart's going to be racing, your adrenaline's going to be up. That's going to increase your stress. You're probably not going to move as efficiently. There's going to be a lot there. But if you're kind of easing yourself into it, for a few weeks, you just spend some time on the mound, do some dry reps, feel it. Then for a few weeks, you're just playing catch on the mound, like 5 fastballs, nice and light, feel it. Then your first pen, you get up there, you keep the intensity dialed back, you take your time, like a 5 to 10 pitch pen, just fastballs, nice and easy, feeling it. Then you ramp up from there. It gives your body some time to assimilate. And then when you start
more confidence too, right?
Yeah,
it's almost
exactly.
like, hey, I'm familiar with this versus this might be a bad comparison, but like a guy who's in the military coming back from a PTSD spout, right? Like before he goes back onto the field, or police officer, whatever it is, and like let's say he has an encounter with something that was really tragic, and the first time that he goes back into the field is there's no training or no like easing into it, no going straight into using a gun. Like you can only imagine that it's going to go bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And that's a lot of these guys have something similar. They have a little bit of that PTSD. Like imagine the last time that they threw a baseball off of a mound, their elbow blew up. So like, or whatever the injury was. So they're going to get up there. They're going to feel some levels of anxiety. And then, same thing with like starting to see hitters. You can't just jump from a regular pen to seeing hitters. You got to start working in some like, ghost hitters, ghost ABs, then jump into maybe some, live ABs. Then you jump into a simulated game. Then and
you
like
add runners
yeah,
situation.
exactly.
Yep.
You add a little bit at a time. So you're not just jumping because some guys will kind of mix it up and they'll think to themselves, oh, they're on the mound. That's the same stress as in a game. Totally not. There's so many more variables.
And it's so easy for us too on the training side to say that, but even me being on the coach's side, and I'm sure Joey, you can kind of attest to that too. Like when you're expecting these kids to go from Christmas break and all of a sudden like, hey, we got 2 or 3 weeks and then we're ready to rock and roll for the training. Like you kind of have to compress that a little bit. So getting them to a point where it's like, hey, you need to be at this volume here. Okay. And then when you get here, we're going to start introducing things. But you could probably push back some of those scrimmage games or things like that to help, assist with that. But also you want to put it to where guys aren't going to be failing too much, right? Like let's say a guy's returning back and he has those PTSD feelings, so to speak, right? Like he's here, but then he gets to that sticking point where he's just like, oh, hey, like this is where I'm struggling the most. And if you let him hang out there and fail, his confidence is going to be shot. So you got to be like, hey, let's push you a little bit. Let's maybe have a stand-in batter. Okay, next pin, let's gain you some more confidence. Let's give you some more, just reps without that. Then let's push that to where you got, that other variable that's maybe pushing you over the edge a little bit.
Yeah.
So to build that confidence, build all that to where they'll be successful.
Yeah, you want to put them in a place to succeed, where they're going to feel good, they're going to feel confident, because a big part of it is just building that confidence back, especially when they've spent so much time off of the mound if they're coming back from injury. And then relating that to, you mentioned kind of starting a season, you don't have that much time. I think that's one of the issues with like the lower levels is like, a lot of coaches aren't expecting their guys or not kind of making sure that their guys in the off season are following a good throwing program and starting to ramp up early. They get to January, they get to school and they get back to practice, and their first time, throwing with a higher intensity is that first day of practice, and they got 2 or 3 weeks for their first game. 2 or 3 weeks ain't enough time to get ready for your first game.
No.
So there's, it's tough.
The approach that we took this year, or at least that I did with guys who would listen, was if they couldn't throw a 60-pitch bullpen, and obviously that included breaks. I think you'd be pretty insane to throw 60 pitches straight. So, whether you'd be doing 6 rounds of 10 or, you go by 12,
you
15.
Say that, there are some little league coaches that let them do that, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, yeah, and that's the crazy thing is that concept was like foreign. I'd be like, hey, let's throw a 50, 60 pitch bullpen. And they'd be like, sick. And they'd throw like 30 pitches in a row. I'm like, yo, but slow it down unless you want to practice stressful innings in your first bullpen or whatever. Obviously, we would build to those bullpens. I mean, we started the year at, 10, 15 pitches, and we would build up. But I didn't want starters going into the first game of the spring if they hadn't thrown at least a 60 pitch, 65 pitch bullpen, because usually they're expected to go 60, 65 pitches. Sometimes they'll run it to 70, but we see high school coaches who are like, oh, their arms are made of rubber. They're young. They can do it. And they're expecting them to throw like CGs in the first half. So it's that under preparation where, like, I don't think there are a lot of overuse injuries anymore. I think it's under preparation. Yes, I mean, there are cases of overuse for sure. I think that's happening at like the youth level, like 10, 12, stuff like that. And then when you get into high school, I think it's an under prep issue because it's like 15 pitch bullpen, season time. And you're like, you're not ready for that. Then you're playing catch up all the time.
Yeah. A good plug for that, I think, for those younger guys to just have general movement is Jeremy Frisch. I follow him on Twitter or X now, I guess, and Instagram. And he's like, hey, kids in PE are not playing as much and they're not going outside nearly as much. They're stuck on video games. So they got to learn how to balance. They got to learn how to do locomotion, jumping, landing, tumbling. Obviously, throwing, catching, hitting is probably already checked off there. But, you have some type of shooting or climbing games, right? Like, if I was going to be developing kids from the very, very youth level, I would start with all of that stuff and almost have like a gymnastic setup where they could go around and just run free for all. And he does a lot of that stuff. And I'm like, dude, this is brilliant because you're helping them get those general movement foundations. And then you let them go and figure out how to be an athlete and just play a game, right? And not get too robotic, too stiff, because that's where a lot of kids get in trouble, especially early on. And what I think is wrong with Americanized baseball is that they just try to make everything too rigid, too structured.
Yeah, I think, to kind of harp on that, one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot is like teaching people, especially young kids, if you're working with youth, is like teaching them how to learn how to move as opposed to teaching them how to move.
You got to put them in that environment to learn that.
Yeah, exactly. Teaching them how to learn how to, transfer energy up the chain, or how to be athletic, or as opposed to saying like, this is how you're supposed to move and putting them in this, cookie cutter and kind of forcing a movement pattern on someone as opposed to allowing them to explore. But yeah, for sure.
Garrison, I'd love your thoughts on some of this too. Is something that we've integrated into the programming, and I also did at the high school level, was for conditioning, doing things like just playing pickup games like rec basketball, soccer, whatever that would be, like
spike
playing
ball. Elite spike ball's awesome. If you don't have it,
spike ball is amazing for that kind of stuff. But let's say you don't have access to that kind of stuff. Like, I was finding guys not only try harder, but they're at least, well, I think the reason they try harder is because they're having fun. It goes hand in hand. They're getting out of session. Yeah. Like I tricked the boys one day. I said, hey, this was at high school, not at Fearless. It was just at the high school level. I said, everybody bring a towel. I thought I would trick them into making them think we were going to do towel drill. And then we went onto the softball field and I was like, put it in your back pocket. That's your tag. And we're going to run around. Basically, whoever has the ball, you got to rip the shirt or the, towel, whatever it is, out of their pocket. Did that for like 30 minutes. Boys were gassed. And I kind of just like tested that on those guys, started integrating it into the private sector, and just saw really good results. Not obviously just in terms of like the athleticism, but just the way guys were able to solve their own movement problems. Like even on the mound, I didn't have to say as much during bullpen sessions because they would just know how they moved better. They would understand like what feels more athletic. Okay, if I go at this speed, this is more smooth, this is more athletic, I'm in more of a flowy state here, versus kind of because I think that pitchers are taught to be so robotic, even with drills. Like something I saw was once guys start doing really Yeah, well, and
Terrible
once
way
they
to learn.
start doing really well with the drills that you give them, like let's say you're doing a bunch of step backs because you're trying to work on, getting a little bit deeper into a hinge just for the sake of argument. They're doing a bunch of step backs, then they improve their hinge really well, and everything's pretty clean. I don't think you need to give them more drills. I think you just need to make them be more athletic and keep throwing like that.
You add more athleticism. Yeah, I absolutely love that. You add more athleticism and then you add more context, like what we were just talking about. You don't dumb it down and give them more decontextualized plyo drills as an example to try to figure out. I think that's or has been very overutilized. And I'm not trying to demonize it. I still use it. My athletes still use it. But you don't want to use all of your training time on flat ground on a plyo wall with any
and I made that
of what's happening. Sure. I mean, I did it even early on in my coaching career. Probably when I was coaching you guys, I was like, hey, you're going to throw 100 plyos today. All right. Like we all learn from it. We're like, look, okay, hey, let's move away from the wall. Let's add a catcher in there and add some context.
Yeah. One of the things I've really enjoyed is throwing and I've seen this work with a lot of guys is doing, if they're going to do drills, incorporating it in like the early part of their catch play.
I like way more.
Yeah, because it adds the context of having a target, throwing it to someone. You can add some more athletic stuff. And it just, I feel like it translates so much better.
Here's a shocker. Maybe throw some of your off-speed pitches while you're doing those drills too.
Love that. You could even throw your bullpen like that too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you could do a step back bullpen. You could do a quick. I mean, I don't know about you could do a quick pick bullpen.
Feel the slope with some of that stuff and
wouldn't do too many of those, but yeah, you could do it.
No,
I had a lot of guys where I was like, hey, your plyos, whatever you're doing, you're like, your first drill is flat ground. The rest of them are on the mound. Figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Add that in there.
Yeah. I like that a lot because, again, we don't want to just take drills and do drills to do drills. We want them to, ultimately we're trying to translate them to our goal, right? And so like, if you're just doing drills to do drills and, you're missing the context of the goal or you have the goal in mind, but you're not essentially doing work to translate it towards that goal. You're kind of wasting your time. And, we were talking earlier a lot about how there's not much time to waste right now in the state of the game. So we want to be as efficient as we can. So we have to translate everything we're doing. We have to be athletic. We have to make things, happen. And I think one of the best ways to get guys to translate stuff is to get them to feel where their body is at. And that includes just allowing them to be athletic, but I think it also includes them building awareness with where their body is at. And so one of the things I like to do with whether it be drills, their catch play, if they're throwing pens, is asking guys, what they felt or what they feel before telling them what you're seeing. Because then they start to make, those connections. And sometimes they see things or they feel things that you miss, or they feel things that like sometimes you'll have a guy miss a spot, but you'll ask them what they felt and they'll be like, the result wasn't where I wanted it, but I felt this and this felt really good. And then they go back to it and it's even better. They hit the spot that, you know what I mean? And it comes together. Yeah. So that feels.
If you coach long enough, you probably say the phrase, how does that feel?
Yeah.
Probably 100 times throughout the week.
1,000,000 times. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a huge part of coaching is like facilitating the learning of the athletes as opposed to just, pushing them in whatever direction you want to push them in, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, and learning that from Randy early on in my coaching career definitely helped, where it was like, hey, you need to manipulate not only the athlete, but the task and the environment. At first, I didn't really kind of conceptualize all of that, but now as I'm, becoming a little bit more seasoned, quote unquote, as a coach, right? I mean, looking back, I was like, wow, I've been doing this for 7 years. This is wild to think about. But, you're like, okay, yeah, nope, I have to mix up not just the athlete, not just tell them what to do. I got to change it, the environment, put them on a slope, or like what Joey was talking about before, change the task completely where it's not even baseball related, where they're playing some tag or, gamifying things to help get them, not only just in a better position to be a better problem solver, but also not be in that mundane rundown. Oh, hey, I just got to go through this routine again. Right. Like, and they're not going to be mentally engaged in that, which is going to cause for burnout, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of burnout is a lack of being able to express their creativity and their unique, authentic movement.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, not just, burnout, but if you're not like fully mentally engaged in a task, there's a lot of motor learning implications there. You're not going to pick up, what the goal is, right? Your body's not going to improve and at least as efficiently as you'd like it to. But if you're fully mentally engaged, you're locked in, you're having fun, you have that kind of excitement, that energy, typically you pick up things a lot faster.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good spot for us to kind of leave off. We'll have to do.
Dude, yeah, we covered so much. That's
awesome. Yeah. I think we'll have to have some more episodes and hit some of these topics even more. This is a blast, man. Garrison, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, sir. Well, it's at Royal Performance on pretty much everything. Obviously plugging my podcast as well on YouTube, but then also Instagram, TikTok, X, whatever platform you got. LinkedIn is a big one for coaches now. Just ROYALPER, the number 4, MANCE. That's usually where most of you guys could probably reach out or email in the zone podcast 123@gmail.com. Or if you got my number, hit me up. Probably had the same number for the past probably 10, 11 years. So it hasn't changed. And if you text me in the past and I've never responded, it's because you probably had an old number that I no longer use that was affiliated with a particular company that I no longer work for. Just put it that way.
Yeah. All right. It's been a pleasure. Hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Garrison has been a huge mentor for Joey and I, especially in our playing days and early on in our career. And now he's a great friend of ours. So it's been a pleasure to have you on, Garrison.
Let's not forget men's mentor too, bro.
Love it.
All right.
All right. 1 second.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Stay Fearless, the Fearless Sports Performance podcast with all things baseball performance training. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, like, subscribe, comment, reach out to us, and keep the conversation going. You can check out our website at fearlesssportsperformance.weebly.com, and you can find us on Instagram at Fearless Sports Performance or on X at FearlessBSBL. Until next time, stay fearless.